This is Lisa from Mobile Tech Review, and I knew you guys and gals would say yes, you wanted this. This is a smackdown between the 2015 13-inch MacBook Pro with Retina display and the 2015 Dell XPS 13. Undeniably, two of the hotter, higher-end 13-inch Ultrabooks on the market, and we're going to compare them now. Well, here they are, two absolutely gorgeous 13.3-inch laptops. One obviously running Mac OS X, the other one running Windows 8.1. Case in point, I always say this first, which operating system do you intend to run? Macs are really awesome running Mac OS, and you can put Windows on them. Now, if you're doing something like Parallels, which is essentially running a little virtual machine inside of Mac OS, then that's pretty cool. But if you want to do boot camp and be Windows all the time, the drivers are just not as great under Windows for the Mac compared to what you're going to get for something that was purpose-built for Windows and gets regular driver updates. You get very rudimentary drivers, particularly battery life can suffer. So, keep that in mind. Next, what do you get? You get a beautiful, lovely unibody metal lozenge either way, right? Now, Dell has moved along the design from the last generation XPS 13, and it no longer has the Mac rounded corner lozenge look. They've gone and done something more of their own. I like that. First off, it's obviously a darker shade of aluminum, and it's more squared off on the sides, and we have the contrasting kind of reverse Oreo look there, so I wouldn't call that a clone of the Mac. Sorry, I wouldn't. Both 13.3 inches, these lovely metal lozenges, both $12.99, similarly configured, which means a high-resolution display, 8 gigs of RAM and 128 gig SSD, or a 256 gig SSD with the Dell. See, it's a little confusing. $12.99 on Dell's website will get you 8 gigs of RAM, the high-resolution touchscreen, and 128 gig SSD. But if you get it from MicrosoftStore.com, that same price will get you a 256 gig SSD. Anyway, around $12.99 or so. With Apple, if you want to go up to 256 gig SSD, it is $14.99. There you have it. If you did the same with Dell, then you're, again, back at the same price. Call them even. Anyway, both beautiful machines, both very durable machines, both very rigid machines and strong machines. Either of these, I don't worry about them. And I know some people sometimes manage to scratch their Macs. I don't. It's an excuse to put cute decals on them or whatever to protect them, or hard shell cases, but they're both pretty darn rugged machines. Metal top and bottom. Dell has gotten rid of the carbon fiber on the bottom, so that you got metal right there. And with the Mac, the same thing. More metal. Pentalobe screws hold this. A little bit harder to find a screwdriver to open it. What would be the point to open it, though? Because just about nothing is repairable. If you're familiar with iFixit, they rate repairability out of 1 out of 10 for something that you can do yourself. You can open it up. You'll see lots of individualized battery packs. Your SSD is socketed. Everything else is soldered on. For the Dell, it is more repairable. You got to use your little Torx screwdriver here, but not too hard to find. Anyway, the SSD is socketed. RAM is soldered on for both of these guys here. Wi-Fi card also socketed. Battery, it's not a million little pieces, so it's easier to take out. So nominally more serviceable, but in both cases, really the only thing you can upgrade yourself is the SSD, and the Dell also the wireless card. Both of these have dual-band Wi-Fi AC and Bluetooth 4.0, so and good quality, so there would be no real motivation to upgrade that anyway. In terms of footprint, well, the Dell XPS 13 is pretty much a marvel because it takes a 13.3-inch Ultrabook and it turns it into something that looks like 11.6 inches when it's closed. But you know what? The 13-inch MacBook Pro is also very compact in terms of dimensions, so you can see there is a size difference, but it's not as huge. In fact, the 13-inch MacBook Pro Retina display has a smaller footprint than the 13-inch MacBook Air. It's very compact. But if you're talking about weight, the touchscreen high-resolution version of the Dell is 2.8 pounds. That's all. Amazing. It is 3.48 pounds, call it 3.5 pounds for the Mac. So you'll feel the difference if you're carrying it. If ultimate lightness is your goal, well, that's pretty important right there. If you go for the non-touch full HD version of the Dell, it's 2.6 pounds. Wow, right? Really, really light. So how about ports? Here we have the MagSafe charging connector for the Mac. We have a traditional charging connector on the Dell. We have two Thunderbolt 2 ports here that also function as mini display ports and a USB 3.0 port. We have one USB 3.0 port on the side of the Dell as well, and one mini display port. No Thunderbolt. You don't see that in too many Windows laptops. and the 3.5 millimeter audio jack. And looking around to the other side, we have SD card slot on both of these. The card will stick out some on both of these. We have full-size HDMI on the Mac as well, and another USB 3.0 port. We have a second USB 3.0 port here, so they both have two 3.0 ports. So the Mac actually does win on port selection for this one. Now how about what's inside? Like I said, you get a lovely backlit keyboard on either of these. More key travel on the Mac keyboard. I like that. The Dell has a very good keyboard, a little low on the key travel there, so for those of you who don't like your fingers slamming down hard against the keyboard deck, it might be a problem. Carbon fiber here looks really cool. Feels very nice. Obviously aluminum all over the place on the Mac. It's silver every which way you look. 13.3-inch displays, both very high resolution, 2560 by 1600 on the Mac. It has that 16 by 10 aspect ratio. It's not quite as widescreen as a Windows laptop. And that is a 3200 by 1800 touchscreen on the Dell. So that's another thing. If you think you like touching the screen, if you like using Metro applications, if you like pinch zooming using your fingers, well, the Dell is going to win. Apple still, for some reason, just says no to touchscreens on their laptops, unlike their tablets and their smartphones. Go figure there. Edge over here, what edge, right? This is the Infinity near bezel-less display. Now, the MacBook Pro is still pretty modern. It doesn't have very big bezels, unlike the MacBook Air. Still a good-looking design, but certainly the Dell looks pretty darn cool just because it has almost no bezel whatsoever. The drawback is if you get the touchscreen model, you're handling it, you're just touching it and picking it up. It's pretty easy to actually touch something by accident and launch a program, that sort of thing. That's the drawback to having almost no bezel on your display. In terms of display brightness, this gets really complicated really quickly. Both of these are set to max brightness now. We're going to go to the desktop now, so we don't have the dimming effect that you get with the Metro. And there you have it. The Dell has some kind of ambient brightness setting going on, even if you turn off all the software settings for that. So it's really going to depend on the environment you're in, how bright it's going to look. You'll get very, very bright in a very, very bright room, and just moderate brightness like this, it'll get moderately bright, but it is set to maximum, and all power settings for display power management are disabled right now, so it should be going at maximum. The Mac also has auto brightness turned on. You can, however, disable it. It's actually at maximum brightness with auto brightness on, and it looks a little brighter right now. So for those of you who like a lot more control over your brightness levels, the 320 nits measured on this particular unit are going to probably appeal more. For those of you who are okay with the adaptive brightness, the Dell is Retina burning bright too. In any given situation, it's pretty darn bright. A little bit higher resolution on the Dell. You're talking about very high pixel density for a laptop on either of these. It's not different enough to really call a difference. Now, one thing we know with Metro applications on Windows, everything scales very nicely, but for some applications and programs that run on the Windows desktop, they don't always respect high DPI scaling. So the drawback is, even if you have Windows scaling to make all your icons look nice and easy to see like they are right here, you might have tiny text on your menus and things like that. Mac OS handles scaling much better. The one drawback I will say is that the best for Retina so-called thing that Apple has set for this, where you do get the maximum graphics performance, which is mostly important if you're using Photoshop, video editor, or playing a game, is equivalent to what you would see on a 1280 by 800 display, and that's just too darn big. Right now I have it at the equivalent of 1440 by 900 for scaling, and I like that better. Anyway, no matter what scaling you choose, everything is always going to be readable on this. Mac OS does handle that part better. So in the end with this one, it's going to be, do you want touch? Then it's going to be the Dell for you as an option also. There is the full HD non-touch for those of you who just want to save some money. Then you can get this for only $899 for 4 gigs and 128 gig SSD. You can also build that up and get more RAM if you want, so on. And if you don't care about touch, you just want a really lovely display with very good scaling for all programs, nothing going to look too small, nothing going to look kind of weird or fuzzy, then, well, the Mac would win there. And that goes if you're running Mac OS X. If you're going to run Windows on this, you'll have all the same trouble with scaling that you do on any other high-resolution laptop. So while Dell takes some point for even greater portability since it is lighter and a little smaller, look at the difference in the display height here. For example, if you're cramped on an airline tray, that can really help when somebody reclines the seat. The Mac takes it back with better overall performance. The Dell, like all Windows Ultrabooks, uses a 15-watt U-Series Intel Core in this case, Core i5 Broadwell CPU. Core i7s are available for both of these. You're just not getting much more for your money. I don't particularly recommend them. But anyway, 15-watt CPU, a little lower, slower power. Now, it's fine for everyday productivity tasks, but for those of you who tend to do more, say you're doing a lot of software compiles, working in Photoshop, editing full HD video, anything even more demanding, calculating large spreadsheets, the 28-watt Broadwell processor in here, and this is the Core i5, is going to win. So we've got the 2.2 gigahertz Core i5-5200U here in our 1299 configuration model on the Dell. On the Mac, we have the brand new Core i5-5257U. That's 2.7 gigahertz turbo boost to 3.1 gigahertz. They both do have turbo boost. Faster CPU. Obviously, not as much jumping going on with the turbo boost. That turbo boost speed is not much above the base clock speed, but more computational power, and also Intel Iris 6100 graphics. For built-in graphics, that's pretty good. That's a definite step up from the 5500 graphics in the Dell. And that's borne out in some benchmark numbers. Now, there aren't a lot of Windows versus macOS benchmark numbers, but Geekbench is one test that we call out. So for our Mac, we got 3325 for single core, 7042 for the multi-core. This is where higher numbers are better. And on our Core i5 Dell XPS with the 8 gigs of RAM, 256 gig SSD, we got 2810 single core and multi-core 5515. So we got like a 2,000 point spread there on the multi-core test. So you get the idea of which one of these is faster. So for those of you who need as much horsepower as possible, the nice thing about the 13-inch MacBook Pro is it gives you kind of full-size laptop computing performance with that 28-watt CPU and the better Intel integrated graphics, the Iris 6100, that you're going to be able to do more challenging and demanding tasks without running back to your desktop. For those of you who don't do those kind of tasks, well, doesn't really matter, does it to you? For display viewing angles, both of these have excellent viewing angles. Traditional IPS on the Mac, and let's just rotate that over so you can see off angle. Now, the Dell uses sharp IGZO technology, which has IPS-like in its characteristics, but uses less power. So in terms of viewing angles, I mean, they both have glare. The Mac might combat it a bit better. A little bit wider viewing angles on the Mac. Now, how often you stare at your laptop off angle, does that really matter much? They're both perfectly acceptable there. And when it comes to battery life, well, there's a reason why the Mac weighs significantly more. It has to power that more powerful CPU and graphics unit in there, and Apple hates to sacrifice battery life. They always have great battery life on their MacBook Pro and airlines, relatively speaking. We're still going through battery tests. It's taking days and days on this because the battery life is so darn good on the 13-inch MacBook Pro with Retina display, the 2015 Broadwell edition. So far, I have been exceeding 10 hours. Absolutely no problem with this, and that's with the high resolution display. That's all you can get, obviously, with this. Really, so far it's been going more like 11 and a half with a mix of productivity use, streaming an episode of House of Cards, which runs just about an hour or so, some YouTube videos, editing in Photoshop, all that sort of stuff. This is a hard machine to kill. And thanks to Broadwell with both of these, the times when the machine's idle, because we don't all continuously, furiously type at our laptops or play videos all the time, they'll use less power. The Dell is it depends on which one you get kind of story. If you go for the full HD non-touch, that one has much better battery life. That one has 10-hour battery life, which is wonderful among Windows Ultrabooks. Now, our touch model here, we've been averaging 7.5 hours of battery life, so not as long as this guy. So all the extra battery, that's what it gets you here. It gets you the better battery life, but it also makes for a heavier machine, too. So how about trackpads? All right, this is, what happens every time. Windows laptops versus Mac laptops. Mac laptops, just generally speaking, have better trackpads as long as you're running Mac OS. Now, if you're using the Windows drivers, then you're getting a not as great an experience there. But anyway, new Force Touch trackpad here. This is the one that you can click in any corner. It moves everywhere ever so subtly. It has a little vibration magnets going on underneath, Force Touch sensor, so if you press and hold, you can do stuff, and you'll feel this like a secondary click. It's really not haptic so much. Apple calls it taptic. It's more like a secondary, deeper click that you feel. It is even better, I have to say, than the original or last generation trackpad. It's just wonderful to use. It's very precise as always. The clicking is great. I never used to be a clicker. I used to be a tap-to-click person. Now I like this. You can even set how much force it takes to do a click on it. It is superbly awesome, wonderful. For those of you who use a mouse externally, well, it won't matter so much to you. But obviously for those of us who do use a trackpad on the go, you can't beat it. Now the Dell has an oversized Synaptics trackpad that we actually liked quite a lot when we reviewed it. And it's funny, some people love this trackpad, some people hate this trackpad. I really would love to know what the difference is here, what is going on. I find it, this is the new Microsoft, basic driver. It gets rid of all the clutter and the things that used to make trackpads a little unpredictable sometimes in Windows. There was too many bells and whistles going on. I find it very precise, well behaved. The click on it, audible but not obnoxious. Obviously, it doesn't click up top here. It doesn't move up top. It's a normal traditional trackpad. Some people like it. Some people hate it. I like it. One thing I have discovered is you have to clean it with a damp cloth. I use a little soft soap on a damp cloth and clean it. Once this gets schmutzed with fingerprint oil, it does become less precise. Is it as good as the Macs? No, but I find it's not bad at all. All right, so how about speakers? And I'll give you a little spoiler here. They both have really good speakers in terms of volume and fullness, and also how they look when they play back video. Guess what? They also look quite good when we play back video. And we'll go the easy route here and just pick top video on our homepage, which is the review of the new Mac. First, we'll do the Dell. This is Lisa from Mobile Tech Review, and here it is, the early 2015 13-inch MacBook Pro with Retina display. This is the one with Broadwell. These are both at 66% volume. This is Lisa from Mobile Tech Review, and here it is, the early 2015 13-inch. Well, the Dell at 66% volume is louder and perhaps a little fuller. I mean, louder does make it sound fuller, but that's really quite good considering that the MacBook Pro has some of the better speakers on the market. So let's go to maximum volume on both of these and see how they sound. And back to the Dell. Inside. Interestingly, it's also on the first with the 28-watt CPU, so this is more powerful than Ultra. And now the Mac. MacBook Pro with Retina display. This is the one with Broadwell inside. Interestingly, it's also on the first with the 28-watt CPU, so this is more powerful. Pretty close at 100% volume there, aren't they? But I might give the slight edge to the Dell there for sounding a little bit richer and fuller. Anyway, both of them really very good. Lastly, for those of you who do use Skype or any other kind of video messaging, there is that one little issue with the Dell, which is the chin cam, as we call it, instead of a webcam. It's down here in the corner because the bezel is so small, there was no room to fit it up top. So people get a less flattering view of you. Your ego has to be a little bit stronger if you use it. With the Mac, you've got the camera right top dead center like you normally would have it because there is enough room on the bezel of the display to have it. So there you have two great laptops. It's not an easy decision. We give points to Dell for offering a lower price model for those who don't have to have all the bells and whistles. For $899, you can get this with the Core i5, 4 gigs of RAM, 128 gig SSD, and the full HD non-touch matte display, which is also IGZO, also gorgeous looking. Apple, no, this is the base model right here. It's nicely configured, but you can't get any cheaper. So if this is beyond your price range, well, your decision's already made. Next is portability. Now, granted, these are both very compact machines. The Dell is the smaller one, but the size difference isn't as big as versus some other 13-inch laptops that the Dell has faced. However, it does weigh a whole lot less, 2.6 to 2.8 pounds versus 3.5 pounds. So portability points. Mac fights back, having more ports and having a webcam in a normal location for those who matter. I don't know how important that is to many of you, but what is important, more horsepower here. For those of you who need to do more heavy computing tasks, you're planning on getting one of these to be your main machine. You don't want to think, especially down the road a couple of years, like, wow, this thing is just too slow for me. You're doing Photoshop and 1080p video editing right now, you're compiling code, you're doing big Excel spreadsheet computers, things like that. This guy is going to win. And for gaming as well, even though neither of these is really a gaming laptop, they're both in the Ultrabook class. The Iris 6100 graphics and the more powerful CPU in here mean more frames in your game. So playing something like Diablo 3, for example, see about 8 frames better on the Mac. Now, the game selection on the Mac isn't so bad, but for those of you who are going to put Windows on here, say Boot Camp or something to play your games, then you'll notice the difference. So there you have it, the 13-inch MacBook Pro with Retina display, the early 2015 model, Broadwell inside, and Broadwell inside our latest generation 2015 Dell XPS 13, one of the hottest Windows Ultrabooks on the market. Same price, metal exterior, backlit keyboards, a lot going for both of these very high resolution displays. And as you can see, either way, you're not going to go wrong. You're spending about the same amount of money. In terms of horsepower, obviously the Mac is going to win. It has the faster 28-watt CPU. In terms of battery life, it depends, as we said, touch or non-touch on the Dell. In the end, it also comes down to what operating system you want to run. If you want to go with Mac OS X, which is a lovely operating system, by all means go with the Mac. But if you want to put Windows on the Mac, you know what I say, you're losing the drivers and all that kind of thing. So, both superb machines. Either way, you got a winner. I'm Lisa from Mobile Tech Review. Be sure to visit mobiletechreview.com for our written reviews with benchmarks and more, and hit that like button.